Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook live broadcast. I'm Steve Altishan, Director of Client Partnerships here at Pacific Cascade Family Law. And today we're here with family law attorney Allison Harper to talk about some common problem areas for co-parents who are trying to plan a spring break vacation for their children and steps that can take to eliminate conflict and stress for all involved. So good morning, Allison. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Steve. I'm doing great. We got some sunshine here, so all is well.
We did get sunshine, cold sunshine, but we got sunshine. We'll take it.
I'll take it though.
I like it. So before we start in, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am an attorney, as you mentioned, here with Pacific Cascade. I've actually been with the company for about 5 years now, and I did work as a paralegal before. So I've really gotten, a lot of client interaction, and I love talking with clients and, helping them work through their family dynamics. And a lot of times it does involve having these conversations about how to best approach conversations about, vacations and things like spring break. So I'm excited to kind of, dive deeper in that today.
Well, good. I'm excited to have you. This is a great topic. It's kind of nuts and boltsy, but it's practical. And so I really like, getting into this. That sometimes lawyers, talk about a lot of legal things, but this has got a lot of just sort of, common sense stuff going on. So I guess the first common sense question I would ask is, when do we start planning?
Yeah, so it's really great to be on top of these things as early as possible. So right now is a great time with spring break, generally landing closer to Easter, around that time. I don't think you can start these conversations really too soon. The more openness that you're having with your co-parent, or pre-planning, I think is just going to help set you up for success for your spring break, to make sure it goes wonderful.
That makes sense to me. So I'm going to start with sort of the hopefully reduced elephant in the room, COVID-19.
Right.
We got to talk about it. It's still here. And I guess it's still going to be a factor in making spring break plans, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, at least for this year, hopefully we are out of the woods by, planning your next spring break. But for right now, there are some logistics that you really need to consider, especially with your children being either with a daycare provider, a babysitter, in school. A lot of these programs do require a negative COVID test, or sometimes a mandatory quarantine if you're traveling within different parts of the country or even abroad. I know for me, my daughter is in daycare, and we did have to provide a negative COVID test when we went out of town recently. So it's important that you check in, contact the provider, and, see if there are those requirements, and whether there's a specific type of test that they require, at home versus the PCR. So it's really important to make sure that you gather that information with ample time, and also time to go ahead and make sure that you have all your ducks in a row on that front.
It's a little tougher right now. It's a real transition time. I mean, states are dropping, changing state to state. I mean, going to Hawaii is different than going to Florida. That's different than going to New York.
Right. Yeah. And with things kind of rapidly changing with new variants, things could, we could be having a much different conversation in a couple weeks from now. So, it's just great to check in to see if there's going to be a mandatory quarantine period, your policies with your workplace, whether if you have, specific COVID leave, or if you need to make arrangements for what that would look like if someone were to fall ill. If that's your child or yourself, because likely they would need to quarantine with you, just based on exposure. And I think it's great to just kind of, like you said, get that elephant out of the room, have that conversation up front. Everyone's level of comfort is going to vary right now as things continue to progress. So the more you can just check in, I think that's just going to eliminate stress all around.
I agree completely. Let's talk a little about the parenting plan, because I know, or I believe, I guess I'm going to ask you if that is something that can actually affect your vacation, or any extended time away from the other parent.
Right. Yeah, I would definitely recommend taking a look at the parenting plan, which is likely attached to your judgment that either you previously worked out with your co-parent or through attorneys. It may have been some time since you've looked at that document. So it's important to just kind of check in, maybe make yourself a little checklist to see if there's certain things that you make sure that you communicate with your co-parent, whether that be sometimes there's specific deadlines that you need to provide to the other party in anticipation of an extended time away. Typically, we see that more with the summer break. Parties sometimes have to let the other party know by, May 15th what their plans are. But it's important to see if you have something like that surrounding spring break to give yourself ample time. It's important to know your plans surrounding whether you need to provide specifics for your itinerary, travel arrangements, and even thinking about pre-planning in the future, sometimes arrangements with passports, things like that. So it's always important to make sure that you check in with your parenting plan, because you don't want to do something that is in violation of the parenting plan and kind of get yourself in a messy situation.
Yeah. One quick question, but that maybe clear the air on this one, because I hear people not really sure about this. It's taking your kid to the doctor if you're not the custody parent. You're on vacation, maybe you have to.
Right. So typically under custody arrangements with parenting plans, if there's some sort of emergency situation that, of course, that we want you to go ahead and do that. But you also want to check in to make sure if your parenting plan has specific provisions of how soon you need to notify your co-parent. That may be 24 hours. So, and it's always just a good practice to keep the other parent in the loop. That kind of makes for a not so pleasant conversation that you may have to have later if something comes up. So it's just important to make sure that what your authority is if something were to arise with an emergency situation. And I always definitely recommend that people check in with the insurance, make sure they have the appropriate copies of their insurance cards that are not expired. Sometimes they're just sitting in your wallet and you haven't looked at it in a while. And make sure if your preferred pharmacies, you're going to have access to that type of care while away. And it's not a bad idea to check in to see what your copay may be, to have a little fund, emergency fund with you on your break. You wouldn't want to have to run into these unanticipated expenses that you don't have the funds for. So always a great idea to just kind of make a little list for yourself and run through to ensure that you have all the necessary information should an emergency arise, and that can help eliminate any stress around that.
Well, first, I think I have insurance cards in my wallet dating back to 1982. But that's neither here nor there. You talked just for a minute there about children's expenses. And I know that there are rules concerning children's expenses, and sometimes they can get kind of either blurred or misunderstood, especially on vacation, like who pays for the vacation kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. So when children expenses come up, that did kind of ring a little bell in my head of that's kind of a two-prong thing that you need to consider, because if there are expenses outside of insurance, usually your judgment will deal with those unreimbursed costs of how you're going to split that. Typically, we see sometimes a 50-50 split, but you may be under some different authority, and your judgment may also have some rules about how soon you need to provide those expenses to ensure that you are within the time frame to get your reimbursement from your co-parent. So that's really important to check in on the unreimbursed, uninsured expense front, which very well may come up seeking care outside of your network on vacation. And secondly, your judgment may also contain provisions regarding extracurricular expenses, day camps. Typically, those are expenses that the parties may agree in advance that the children may participate in. You may have signed up your child for, a science camp during spring break, a day camp if you need alternative care. And it's important just to kind of check in to see what the cost allocation may be with your co-parent, so that you have all that information and plan accordingly when signing up your child for some of these extra additional expenses.
That's so logical, and it gets to kind of one of the crux of the matters you've hit on it a little bit, and that's communication between the parents. It seems like that's a real important thing.
Right. Yeah. Communication, I think, is really important. And I know sometimes it can be met with a bit hesitation if the co-parenting relationship has, maybe some little bit of stress dynamics. But like you said, pre-planning and making sure that we're getting in front of that beforehand, I think can help eliminate a lot of those stressors in that communication when you are starting to discuss your travel plans.
Do you think it's a good idea how far do you go in terms of kind of letting your co-parent know about your plans? I mean, I know that when we go on vacation, we have a document of itinerary and stuff. I mean, is that something you should consider sharing?
I definitely think so. I mean, one, per your rules of your judgment, you very well may have specifics that you for sure need to provide, whether that be of accommodations that you're staying, maybe who you're traveling with, things like that. I think I would always advise on erring on the side of caution. You want to give as much information. You would hate to be in a situation if there's some sort of emergency and your co-parent has no way of knowing, where you are, how to get a hold of you, or even if, there's an emergency with them back home. It's important that there's kind of that two-way, channel of communication so everyone's on the same page. It's always a great practice just to write it down, even for yourself. When you're planning a trip and making an itinerary. I definitely am the organizer of that, and I usually have a document of, where we're staying, the phone number, address, anything like that, especially if you're maybe traveling somewhere that's out of a cell phone zone, and you lose GPS. We're so connected to our devices, and I don't think I could get myself out of my neighborhood sometimes if I didn't have GPS. And we really rely on that. So it's important to kind of have that written down, not even for your co-parent, but just yourself, because you never know when you may need to pull out of your back pocket and, pat yourself on the back and thank yourself for having that easily accessible.
Little flip switch for a parent who's, let's say the parent not taking the vacation with the kid. I mean, it sort of works on them too, the same. I mean, because they may have information, especially if the custodial parent, that is not necessarily an everyday piece of information that the other parent necessarily has all the time. And it seems like it might be important for them to share some of this stuff as well. You talk about medications, allergies, that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's especially if you aren't the custodial parent and maybe it's been a little bit of time since you've exercised this extended, chunk of time with your child. A lot of times we'll see in long distance type of co-parenting relationships, the non-custodial parent, non-primary parent would typically exercise a bulk of the time, whether that be during summer, winter break, spring break, like is upcoming now. So it may have been several months since one of the parents has actually spent a large amount of time with the child. So it's really important to check in to see, has the child gone to the doctors recently? Is there a change in medication? Any new allergies? Important to have that list because, again, you would hate to find yourself in a situation where an emergency arose and you need access and you just simply don't have it. And typically when those things come up, time is kind of the essence. You sort of need to know right then and there. And you would, especially if you're traveling and you're in a different time zone, you just may not have that same access to the co-parent for an immediate response if needed.
There's a lot of stuff that you potentially are talking about here. And if you are unlike me and your technology doesn't go far beyond the pencil and paper, are there apps out there? Are there things people can use in something like this to kind of put this all together and share it?
Yeah. So a lot of co-parents already have something set up through, their prior case or, when things kind of ended, something like My Family Wizard. They may have access to that already. So that's a great tool for communications and stored documents. In addition, if you don't have access to something like that or funds are preventative for you to have a program that does cost, something like a shared Google document would also be a great accessible document. Most people are familiar with Google, and there you can have, an active shared spreadsheet that you both can plug information into, update, chat back and forth. And like you said, nothing is, better sometimes than that pen and paper. So really just go ahead and jot it down. And oftentimes when you are writing things down, you're more likely to remember something that you may need to follow up with on your co-parent or for yourself. So it's a great practice to start as soon as you can, making sure that you facilitate that communication if needed.
Now, communication, again, goes both ways. And a lot of times it feels like some people, communication just means telling someone else something. But, what about a concern that maybe the parent has about some portion of the trip? I'm going to go on a vacation to Guatemala, and there's a 17-mile zip line. I mean, these kinds of things that some parent may say, well, hold on, I'm a little concerned about this. I mean, it's important to kind of think about those feelings that the other parent has.
Absolutely. I think that it's never a bad idea to give more consideration, and also to remember that if your co-parent is expressing concern about a specific activity, it's likely not coming from a bad place. That parent is just thinking about the safety of your child or your children. And it's just not a bad idea to talk through that itinerary to see if maybe there's a more age appropriate activity or something else that you can add into the trip that both parties are comfortable with. And it's really important to think about that, especially in light of COVID. How we talked, we're not quite out of the woods for this upcoming spring break period, where you may be doing activities like, planning to go up to the mountains or to have sleepovers with some of your friends, or go over to family celebrations, go over, Easter, things like that, where, you and your co-parent may have a little bit of disagreement about what that looks like. And I think right now, just flexibility is really key to maybe just have some considerations of, okay, can we maybe alter the plans a little bit so everyone's comfortable? Anything you can do to assist in keeping that peace within the co-parenting relationship, keeping it child-centered, is really ultimately going to contribute to the success of a long-term co-parenting relationship, which is ultimately the goal. I know that that's hard to hear sometimes, but really your children are at the heart of this. And the more that the parents can work together, you just see extreme benefit for the children's perspective and point of view.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's talk about a couple, just sort of nuts and bolts of planning a vacation, and some tips that you may have just for co-parents that are taking their kids on vacation. I know we've talked a little bit about sort of, I think you called it packing for success, and just preparing for the trip. What kind of things can you tell us?
Yeah, so there's definitely several things that you want to kind of think about in this kind of time frame, and also really considering the age of your children and where you're at in your co-parenting journey. Is this maybe one of the first big trips that you're taking with your child, where maybe they haven't spent time away, or maybe it's their first time on an airplane? Oftentimes the more that you talk about and prepare children for things, the better success they're going to have overall. I know when we flew with my daughter recently, we said, we're going to go on a big airplane, and, the sounds are going to be loud, and you may see a lot of new people. I think sometimes we often try to give a little more credit than due to our little ones of just what they may be acclimated to. And in these times, our kids have experienced a lot of change, and they may, coming from a period of being more isolated, and not around their friends or family members. So I think really, preparing your children and having these talks with them about, this really exciting trip. We're gonna, share the itinerary with your children, let them have input, and also, really consider, is maybe this time of year some sort of tradition that, maybe we did with the co-parent for several years? Is there a special camping trip or an event that takes place in this year? And maybe, give some credit to that, you may not realize if your child maybe remembers that, or if that's something that's so important to them. And so really having like patience and open communication, even with your children, I think is kind of helping kind of pack for success too. I would hate that a co-parent spends a ton of money and time and planning this wonderful trip and not checking in with their kid to see if this is something that they're excited about, or if they have reservations. It's really important to take those things into consideration as well, so that you just can enjoy your time together and create those really special family memories.
I know that you talked about, especially orienting kids new to this, and the first time we took our kids on a vacation that was not nearby, the time zone kind of became, something they weren't ready for. And the whole bedtime, and when people call them, I think we had our grandparents call us like at 3 a.m. or something, so
Right.
those kinds of things can happen, can't they?
Right. So it's really important also when you're checking in on your parenting plan and your judgment to see, to make sure that you can comply with regularly scheduled phone calls or FaceTime visits. Often the, so to speak, off parent has a certain set phone calls, FaceTime visits, and you want to take into account, oh, I'm 3 hours ahead. We need to adjust. So it's not a bad idea to check in ahead of time to say, are we going to be able to keep this on schedule? Do we maybe need to offer another set of times that work for the other co-parent with the change in time zones? And the earlier you can have that conversation, I think that another co-parent is generally a lot more receptive versus if you're springing it on them right before they're scheduled to talk and you're saying, oh, hey, we're actually out doing this activity. I'm sorry, they can't come to the phone. You're having this wonderful fun vacation, and it's important just to make sure you're checking in with your other co-parent, that they still have access to the child as well as or children, so that they can check in too and hear about the trip, or just because they miss them as well too.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I guess a parent could get upset if they call it in, but you're on Splash Mountain and you can't answer, but then you come back and show them, this is what we were doing. It makes everybody feel better.
Absolutely.
You talk also about flexibility being important. Sometimes you just have to change your plans at least a little bit, I guess.
Right. Absolutely. Again, with the COVID right now, there's always a chance that maybe you or your child falls ill before, a big trip that you've been planning, that you've been anticipating. And of course, you're going to be disappointed. But, flexibility is just so important. Is there that special camping trip you're planning on going that's just not looking like it's going to work out with maybe weather or illness or just, some other unanticipated event? Drag that tent to the backyard, like fire up some s'mores on the oven or the barbecue. And I guarantee just those small efforts of something can really go just such a long way, and really creating such a fun memory. And maybe something like that, could become a new tradition, that you camp in the backyard with the neighbor, or, whatever that may be. If you want to invite some friends over, if, just something didn't work out, I think that there's always ways that you can make up for some missed time if the plans kind of fell through.
Everything that we're hearing just sounds like great advice for parents, co-parents taking their kids. And I imagine this advice kind of isn't just obviously a spring break advice, but just, kind of any special moment advice, in the world of co-parenting.
Yeah. A lot of times, sometimes these special trips can, cause just a little bit of a different dynamic with the co-parent, just because, sometimes if someone's staying home, they may be a little bummed, or if this is, a fresh separation from the parties, and, just really change the dynamic for everyone. So I think if there's something you can do just to kind of extend that olive branch, whether that be send your co-parent some photos of your child with a theme park character, or, at the beach, whatever they may be doing, your child is probably very excited to tell mom or dad back home. And, maybe they want to pick up a souvenir, something that, just to share that experience. And I definitely would encourage that, just because, friendliness, I think, goes a long, long way. And again, your child is probably so excited to share this wonderful trip and memories with their co-parent or even other family members as well.
I love the souvenir idea. I mean, talk about bringing everybody involved and feeling good about it. That's a great tip. So shifting a little bit, and we've talked a little bit about this, but the parent who is staying home, do you have any advice or some tips, something to talk to them? They're the ones staying home, what would you tell them if they came in and said, they're going on this great trip and I'm, not happy because no one asked us to go. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think use that as an opportunity to have some alone time. I mean, kids are chaotic and I think everyone can acknowledge a break, is very welcomed. And a lot of times we don't even realize how much a break can be welcomed because we're just often not in an opportunity to maybe have that extended time. So, use that. Is there maybe a trip that you've been wanting to plan for yourself? To visit some family members. We've all been away from a lot of our family for, quite extended periods of time. There's definitely some things that you can plan for yourself. You don't have to just be sitting at home. If you have, maybe some vacations stacked up, it's not a bad idea to consider, investing in you. And ultimately, a break is just such a wonderful thing to do if you have that opportunity to also give yourself that time to have a deep breath and, just to kind of, unwind. So you don't have to think of it as you're just sitting at home and you're missing out. You can go and create, some memories for yourself and, focus on you during that time as well.
Just made me think about something that I hadn't thought about. What about the leaving for the vacation and the coming home from the vacation? I know that parenting plans have fairly strict rules about pickup time, pickup place, all of those things. How does that work with maybe a vacation or a plane trip or something like that? And is that something that needs to be sort of taken into consideration?
Definitely. Again, I would definitely first start out with looking at your judgment or parenting plan. You may already have that language built in about drop-offs, pickups, flights, etc. That already may be there. That's something that you contemplated ahead of time, especially if you're in a long distance situation. And if not, again, start early with that communication. Share the travel plans. I anticipate landing at PDX at X time. How do we want to facilitate getting that time if maybe the other parent wants to, resume time the next day. There likely may be a little bit of transition time as well, just on the logistics of when your travel. And you may be in a situation where you need to consider offering some makeup time. I think the more that you can anticipate that those things come up, the better that you will, again, be prepared for success during your spring break or other vacation. You just want to make sure you're checking in, communicating. When you eliminate the surprises and you're not kind of ambushing someone with plans, I think you're setting yourself up for a way more successful and fruitful conversation with your co-parent.
So we're almost done. We're running out of time. This was really, really good. Just maybe a couple of questions or tips maybe for the child. Maybe the children are either feeling guilty or they're feeling a little apprehensive, those kinds of things. What would you tell the co-parent?
Yeah. I think oftentimes a lot of us can agree that children are creatures of habit. They're used to their routines, maybe the time that they're spending with each parent, schooling, etc. So sometimes going on a trip for an extended period of time may bring up a little bit of anxiety for your child. So talk to them, get their input, maybe show them, photos of where you're going to go, have them have that input of where they're going to, things that they're going to do. And if they're expressing some, apprehension of leaving the other parent, encourage it. Tell them that they're going to have such a wonderful time with their other parent, or talk about what the things that they're going to be doing. Talk about it, help them pack their clothes. There's certain things they need. And also, children also feed off of our emotions. So if you're kind of bashing the co-parent or, showing that you're a little sad about the trip, they're probably going to go into the trip or, you wouldn't want them to go to their other parent and said, Mom or Dad said this about this trip. And, those kind of things, that's just not really appropriate. And, it's likely that you're going to be in this situation for many spring breaks or summers to come ahead. So if you can start out from the beginning, or is this an opportunity to be new and extend that olive branch, start over, turn the page and have a fresh start. Anything you can do to just really encourage and facilitate such a wonderful trip, whether it's you taking it or you sending off your child. Really sit down and think about, how can I make this the best experience possible for my child?
Yeah, don't use it as a sword. Don't make it a competition.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Allison. This was wonderful, and really, really thank you for being here today. Great insight on ways to prepare for spring break. There's great ways to make it good for everyone and to plan ahead. And I thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. It was great to be here. And if you have questions about your parenting plan or logistics, it's not a bad idea to reach out to maybe your attorney. If we helped you beforehand, give us a call. We're happy to, look at those logistics and help you review your parenting plan or see if we need to address anything further to help set you up for success.
Yep. Total great advice. Thank you. And thank everyone again for joining us today. If anyone, as Allison said, has questions on today's topic, any concerns, you can either post them here or you can get in touch with us. We can connect you with Allison. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, and goodbye.
Bye. Enjoy your spring break.